Please call the roll.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Rubio.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Maps. Wheeler.
Here. This is the February 23rd, 2022 afternoon session of the Portland City Council under Portland City Code and state law. The City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video and teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, www.portlandoregon.gov/video, and channel 30. The public may provide written testimony to the council by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, your flexibility, and your understanding as we work through these challenging circumstances to conduct the city's business. And with that, we will hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions, reports, or the first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at www.portland.gov/council/agenda contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the City Council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist, and if you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the electronic meeting. Please be aware that all council meetings are recorded.
Thank you very much. First up today is item number 139, a resolution.
The Bureau of Transportation's revenue strategy to achieve budget stabilization and advance policy goals and direct near-term revenue actions.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Hardesty. This is all you.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm excited for the presentation and discussion we are about to have regarding a new revenue strategy for the Bureau of Transportation. PBAT is facing unique and significant funding challenges. Major structural issues and policy conflicts exist within the Bureau's primary revenue sources. And as transportation revenues flatten or decline, as we've seen happen during the pandemic, the cost to maintain our system and deliver new investments that meet the needs of our community are growing rapidly. This is an unsustainable situation. Last year, during the budget cycle, City Council directed PBAT to identify new revenue sources that move away from fossil fuel dependency and that are better aligned with our policy priorities. Bureau staff have been hard at work thinking through multiple strategies that will help to stabilize revenues and help us to advance a safer, more equitable, and more climate-friendly transportation system. Last October, we also heard the pricing options for Equitable Mobility Task Force recommendations around using price signals to create a more climate-friendly and equitable transportation system. And we asked staff to come back with more specific implementation recommendations in the summer of 2022. So I am pleased today to introduce this resolution and hear from staff about their 3-layered revenue strategy and their initial proposal to both stabilize revenue and take an initial step towards sending a new price signal in line with quorum recommendations. This first step is small, but we're 4 or 5 months ahead of schedule And I'm very pleased to see that this work is moving, this critical work is moving forward. There is a sense of urgency to this proposal because climate change is here. Additional price signals can help people to understand the cost of their decisions to drive in single occupancy vehicles trips. And the new transaction fee we will hear about today thoughtfully balances pricing with dedicated funds to build and expand transportation affordability programs for low-income households. This is a good step in the right direction. There's also urgency because the Bureau needs stability to keep delivering on the promises we've made to Portland. I am so proud of the resiliency and innovation PBOT has shown over the last few years amidst the challenges of the pandemic and much else. Staff will share a bit more about the tremendous accomplishments they've made despite these financial challenges. But the fact remains that continuing this work requires a new strategy. And I'm excited for all of us to hear more about that strategy today. I am pleased to hand it over to, I think, one of the best directors, if not the best director at the City of Portland, Director Chris Warner, who will share more about PBOT's recent work and the resolution that's before you today. Thank you so much. Director Warner, take it away.
Thank you for that too kind introduction, Commissioner Hardesty. And thank you. Good afternoon, Council. For the record, my name is Chris Warner, and I'm Director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. If we could start the slide deck, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you. All right, let me exit full screen. Okay. All right, we're excited to be here today to share a financial strategy, which is not just about ensuring future financial stability, but really does set us up for that future conversation that the Commissioner referred to. To start, I want to say a little bit about why we're here and why this is the time for rethinking our revenue strategy, and that time is now. Next slide, please. One more. Great. As the Commissioner noted, today's presentation represents our response to the directive you gave us in last year's budget process. In that budget note, Council charged PBOT with identifying a new revenue strategy that reflects our policy priorities, particularly the need to reduce carbon emissions and moves us away from the dependence on fossil fuel-based revenue sources, addresses structural deficits that have led to this difficult budget discussions we've been having in recent years, and also provides resilience and flexibility to set us up for the future. Next slide. But while we're here to specifically respond to the budget note, we're also here for a bigger reason, because we are committed to building that better future. The almost 900 staff at PBOT work every single day to create a transportation system that delivers what our community expects and needs. As stewards of our transportation system, we feel a deep responsibility to ensure that our system is equitable and just, safe, efficient and multimodal, climate friendly, well-maintained, resilient, and is also supportive of our local economy. These values are our North Star, and I'm proud of the significant strides we've made in each of these areas. I'm particularly proud of the work the Bureau has accomplished to create this system that our community expects, but also we did it during these last 2 years of the pandemic. Here's a few of our recent accomplishments. We've made big investments in improving the safety of our system, including more than $128 million invested in the high crash network improvements that we've had since 2019. We recently made national news with the opening of the Ned Flanders crossing across I-405, and we'll be soon completing the Blumenauer pedestrian and bicycle bridge over I-84 this year. Both of these bridges fill the key sections of our multimodal network and are a testament to our commitment to funding safe and climate-friendly transportation infrastructure. And I really want to applaud our maintenance crews, the true essential workers of the city that have showed up every day during the pandemic to keep our city moving. They've repaired nearly 20,000 potholes in the last 3 years, in addition to doing all of the paving and fixing signs and repairing street signals and all the other things that our PBOT crews have done. But while we've made progress, we're also facing big and growing challenges that require even more of our budget, of our Bureau, and of the transportation system. To meet the growing needs of our city, we need additional revenue, and that's why we're here today. I think we need what we've really referred to as bold leadership at all levels, the local, regional, state, and national, and the time to move with urgency is now. Next slide. Next slide. And that again is why we're here, to find this new revenue strategy. At this point, I would like to hand it over to Ryan Kinsella, PBOT's finance manager. He's going to share a little bit about the current state of our finances, and then we'll go into the specifics. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Great, thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, City Council. For the record, my name is Ryan Kinsella, and I am PBOT's finance manager. Over the next few slides, I'm going to provide some context on PBOT's current financial situation and further explain why we need a new revenue strategy. All right, next slide. On this slide here, you can see our primary source of incoming revenue. Broadly, these revenues fall into two buckets. First, discretionary dollars are flexible funds that we can allocate to programs as needed. We often refer to these funds as general transportation revenue, or GTR. Our primary sources of GTR are the state highway fund and parking revenues. We'll talk more about those sources here in just a minute. The second category of revenues are called our restricted funds. These dollars must be spent on prescribed uses only and often come with grants, from grants with specific requirements, or are restricted to support fee-based services like permitting or regulatory programs. Of PBOT's $541 million budget, only $127.8 million is ongoing discretionary revenues. Next slide. Our discretionary general transportation revenues are really important. It funds many of the critical programs that are vital to advancing our goals and supporting the transportation system that our community expects. It's also our most flexible funding that can be used for investments like operations and maintenance programs for which we have no other sources of funding. This chart summarizes the general breakdown of how we invest our general transportation revenues and the types of activities that this helps support. Next slide. As mentioned before, our primary sources of discretionary general transportation revenues are the State Highway Fund, which is made up of fuel taxes, DMV fees, and weight mile fees, and parking revenues, which come from on-street parking meters, permits, and citations. Both of these primary funding sources, however, have baked in structural issues and limitations. Fuel taxes are decreasing over time as cars become more fuel efficient, which is important for our climate goals, but it has a hit to our revenues. The State Highway Fund is also controlled by the state legislature, so there is a lack of local control, and rates are not automatically indexed to inflation. And as of right now, the scheduled rate increases of House Bill 2017 are due to stop in 2024. Parking revenues are also not indexed to inflation, and we haven't raised parking rates since 2016. Parking revenues are also subject to demand volatility. And finally, both sources are currently a flat fee structure that are regressive, meaning that they don't account for different income levels. One question that we often get is, what about the federal transportation funding, especially in light of the recent infrastructure bill passed by Congress? Unfortunately, federal funds go primarily to the state, and we have to apply for very specific grants to access those funds. We also have to have match funds that we have to use our own revenues to support those grants. And lastly, federal funds typically support specific projects rather than our ongoing operations. And so while more federal funding is a good thing for transportation, it doesn't directly improve PBOT's financial situation. All right, next slide. PBOT is also in a unique position compared to other bureaus. Unlike other bureaus that annually increase rates with inflation and to meet asset needs, PBOT has not regularly increased parking meter rates. This graph, for example, shows rate changes over a 10-year period for water, the Bureau of Environmental Services, CPI, and PBOT parking meters. And while other bureaus have all raised rates to meet their needs and prepare for inflation, our meter rates have remained flat. Next slide. We are also in a unique position in terms of the small amount of revenue that we get from the general fund. This chart attempts to show that. The x-axis on this chart shows the general fund changes relative to inflation over the past 7 years, meaning that a bureau that is to the left of the red line represents the bureaus whose funding levels today are less than inflation, indicating a reduction in funding for services. Bureaus to the right of the red line have increased funding levels above inflationary amounts. The size of the dot represents the amount of the bureau's ongoing general fund allocation. As you can see, PBOT's dot is small, as we only receive about $9.4 million from the general fund each year, and we are far to the left on the x-axis because our general fund allocation has been cut since 2015. Next slide. Combined, these structural issues lead to this forecast. The blue line shows our projected revenues, which are expected to increase with inflation and may even increase more than this chart shows as our service and asset needs grow. But our revenues are forecasted to flatten, and this means our deficit is due to grow significantly over our forecast. Increased labor costs, such as the recent settlement with DCTU and rising interagency costs, only add to this gap. And whereas general fund bureaus often receive resources to cover their portion of cost, PBOT must balance these increases through cuts or raising new revenues. This challenge isn't new. Quote, the Bureau has significant challenges paying for poor transportation services with revenues that have not kept up with increasing costs. This excerpt is pulled from the city's 2009-2010 adopted budget, but reflects the funding challenges that PBOT has always faced: flat revenues, rising costs, increased service demands, and aging infrastructure. Next slide. These trends existed before 2020, but the pandemic exacerbated our challenges. Overnight, when COVID arrived, our parking revenues plummeted. Parking still remains 40% below our pre-pandemic forecast. And in total, we expect to lose about $88 million in revenue due to the pandemic compared to our earlier forecasted expectations. And this, combined with our projected deficit, as shown in the previous slides, means that we need about $30 million to balance our 5-year forecast and $130 million to balance the 10-year forecast. Next slide. Those previous slides told a purely financial picture, but it's also important to note that our policy goals conflict with our revenues. To meet our climate, equity, safety, and mobility goals, we need driving trips and fuel consumption to decrease significantly. But we're also relying on fuel taxes and parking to fund our work. And so when driving declines, we can't deliver what Portlanders expect. Next slide. This financial reality has had significant implications for PBOT's last 2 budgets. Across the last 2 fiscal years, PBOT has taken cuts equal to 9% of our discretionary revenues as a result of this reality, or about $75 million of reductions in our 5-year budget. In fiscal year 21-22, we took a 7% cut, including the elimination of 39.5 FTE. In this most recent budget, we proposed reductions of 3.5% and the elimination of 4 FTE. We're actually cutting 12 FTE that are funded by GTR, but reallocating 8 to externally funded capital projects. No other bureaus have had to take cuts of this magnitude since the Great Recession. This has reduced our capacity to deliver core critical services and make progress in creating a safer, more equitable, and more climate-friendly transportation system. If we do not address our revenue shortfall, we will have to make more cuts in the future, further impacting service levels. Next slide. I'll now hand it back over to Director Warner to introduce the revenue strategy that we've developed to begin to stabilize our financial situation and build to the future.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Next slide. So we're excited to share with you today our 3-part revenue strategy for building an equitable, safe, and climate resilient mobility future. The first part is stabilizing our revenue situation now and into the future, so we can stop the immediate budget cuts and keep delivering on what Portlanders expect from us in the years to come. This means addressing those graphs you saw in the earlier part of the presentation and avoiding that growing deficit we currently face. The second part is to send price signals in our transportation system that align with our policy goals and capture the true cost of rising vehicle miles traveled on our roads. In turn, as we send those price signals, we must keep making investments that expand affordable, accessible, multimodal alternatives to driving. This is directly tied to the recommendations from the POEM task force that you heard about last fall. And finally, we need to move away from the reliance on fossil fuel-based revenue sources so we get out of this conflict of our policy goals and we can continue building to the future we've described. These parts are not mutually exclusive. In fact, we will seek strategies that advance all parts of this as much as possible. Next slide. So today we're pleased to present there are 3 near-term moves we have proposed in our requested budget that will help us bridge to the future. Combined, these steps will help us stabilize our budget in the immediate term and represent an important first step towards implementing the price signals aligned with the POEM recommendations. We'll talk about each of the component parts you see on the screen here in more detail in the following slide. These moves will help us begin to limit future budget cuts like those Ryan shared that we've made over the last couple of years. It will also help us provide stability that is essential to help us accelerate future innovations like robust price signals and strategies recommended by POEM, as well as pivoting away from the fossil fuel-based sources entirely. Next slide. Part one of the near-term strategy to the future is the implementation of a climate and equity mobility fee on each on-street parking meter transaction beginning this summer. This small fee of 20 cents will begin to send a signal to drivers about the cost of driving, including the carbon, safety, and space implications of driving by car. We have intentionally designed this fee in alignment with the principles set out by the POEM Task Force, namely the importance of using revenue generated to support households living on low incomes and to expand access to multimodal alternatives. We propose using this funding from this fee, which we expect to be around $2 million annually after the first year, to fund the expansion of our successful affordable housing transportation wallet, which provides households on lower income with passes and credits that can be used in a variety of multimodal transportation options. The Bike Town for All program that provides discounted bike share rides to people living on low incomes, increased outreach around our other existing affordability programs, including our Smart Parks swing shift reduced rates program for people living on low income. And we also use it for investments in quick, small build, multimodal infrastructure projects. And the other piece, which is really important, is greater research and policy development to inform more robust pricing and transportation affordability programs. Next slide. The second part of our proposal is related to our parking permit programs, including the area parking permits, the special event permits, and the temporary street use permits. Today, these permits only cover about 60% of the program administration costs, so we're losing money on them. Over the next 4 years, we are proposing small staggered increases to these rates so we can achieve full cost recovery. We're also actively exploring different program designs that can allow us to reduce the impacts of these increases on drivers living on low income. Next slide. And finally, the third piece of our near-term bridge proposal is to implement the city's performance-based parking policy adopted by council in 2018, but delayed due to the pandemic. And we would like to start that next year. The policy means rates will be adjusted annually in different areas based on demand. Rates will be higher in high demand areas and lower in low demand areas. While we implement performance-based parking, we also propose bringing the base meter rates up to par with inflation, which would mean a 40 cent per hour increase from today's rates. Moving forward, we will index rates to both demand and to future inflationary increases to stabilize our forecast and to avoid the situation where we're in today, where rates have not risen since 2016 and they're out of line with inflation since that time. These three items I described from the last 3 slides are the moves we are looking for and what we want your support on today. Next slide. And as we look to the future, we know that there'll be more work to do after these near-term bridge moves. PBOT will continue exploring additional opportunities that support each of the 3-pronged strategy. And again, many revenue options will support multiple parts of the strategy you see here. I also want to note that while we're talking about the challenges and growing needs today, this strategy isn't just about stopping the bleeding or catching up. It's about setting us up for the future and enabling us to be innovative, bold, and nimble in the years to come. Next slide. Before we close, I'd like to share a few more high-level ideas that we are considering aligned with each part of our 3-pronged strategy. To continue stabilization now and into the future, we need to work to stabilize local and state fuel taxes, which represent 60% of our discretionary revenues today. In 2024, as was referenced earlier, both our local 10-cent gas tax called Fixing Our Streets and the scheduled state highway fund increases will expire. While these are still fuel-based sources, it is critical we avoid that 2024 cliff to retain stability while we identify longer-term sources not connected to fossil fuels. This will mean advocacy at the state level, but also considering ways for us to renew our Fixing Our Streets program here locally. We also know that there is more to explore across other fees we charge in our permitting programs, and to achieve greater cost recovery, we'll be diving into that later this year as well. Next slide. As I mentioned briefly, we know that there's much more work to do to send stronger price signals in line with the bold and ambitious POEM recommendations. We're working hard to develop those pricing options and complementary strategies that support the climate, equity, and mobility outcomes that we all want. This is a space where we can be really innovative and forward-thinking, and we're excited to come back later this year with more information and progress on this front. Next slide. And finally, we know we need to pivot away from the reliance of fossil fuel-based revenue sources. One way we can do this is by structuring our revenue sources around uses and benefits from our streets and our right-of-way rather than fuel consumption. This could mean exploring ways to capture the cost of development impacts and commercial uses of the right-of-way. It also means moving to a system where users pay based on miles they drive rather than the fuel they use. While still tied to the use of the right-of-way, these ideas are not dependent on fuel consumption, supporting necessary decarbonization of the transportation system. Next slide. And moving away from the reliance on fossil fuels may also mean exploring revenue-generating tools not tied directly to transportation or right-of-way use. While it isn't in the norm in Portland today, it is common in other cities to use more traditional funding mechanisms like sales, property, or payroll taxes, as well as general fund to support transportation needs. All of these ideas will, of course, take further development, thought, outreach, and engagement, but we hope this gives you a sense of what we'll be exploring across our three-pronged strategy in the months ahead. Next slide. But I just wanted to go back to what we're asking you today. We're seeking your support in the near-term proposal, including the three items, is the climate and equity mobility transaction fee, staggered increases to parking permit rates to bring them up to cost recovery, and implementing performance-based parking in 2023 while bringing the base rates up to inflation. We're also looking for your support to keep on going with these mid and long-term moves that advance all the parts of the strategy. And today's resolution directs us to return to you within a year with an update on these proposals. Next slide. Before we close, I again want to reiterate again that despite these really challenging financial circumstances, I'm so proud of the way our Bureau has shown resilience and continued work during this challenges of the last 2 years. The revenue strategy is not only about the financial stability, but also about ensuring that our tremendous staff can continue delivering these critical services and meet the needs of tomorrow. So thank you very much. I think we have a little bit of invited testimony, or we can answer questions now. I think that's up to council's discretion. So
thank you, Director Warner. I thought before we opened it up, we would invite James Ellis and Susan Johnson, who are co-chairs of PBOT's Bureau and Budget Advisory Committees, to speak, and then happy to answer any questions and open it up for more. Does that sound okay, Mayor? All right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to go.
James, you want to go first?
I'm James Ellis, and along with my counterpart, Susan Johnson, who is unfortunately unable to make it today, are the new co-chairs of PBOT's Bureau and Budget Advisory Committee. I'm here today to express the committee's support for the Bureau's proposed budget strategy. First, the committee would like to extend its gratitude to PBOT staff for their commitment to serving our community through a very difficult time. We have deep appreciation for the Bureau's successful mitigation of many of the negative impacts of lost revenue during the COVID pandemic. Your work on this proposal demonstrates the Bureau's commitment to public safety, transit equity, and climate resilience. Throughout my time with BBAC, I've been impressed by the pragmatic approach that staff have taken in balancing tactical budget development efforts with larger strategic goals valued by Portland's residents. These recommendations are aligned with those released by the pricing options for Equitable Mobility Task Force, provide an opportunity to capture more of the costs of driving and parking that are necessary to help stabilize the Bureau's budget in the near term while we pivot from fossil fuel dependent revenue sources. Rather than simply filling holes in the budget, PBOT has reiterated its commitment to creating a path towards a more sustainable and equitable future. We appreciate the opportunity to express our support for PBOT's budget strategy and look forward to continuing to partner with the Bureau as they implement these strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That concludes the invited testimony.
Very good. Colleagues, I'll open it up for questions. And Keelan Walrata, could you tell me if we have public testimony on this item?
We do, Mayor. We have 6 people.
Okay, very good. I'll ask at this point if anybody has any questions. I'm not seeing any at this particular moment, so why don't we go for public testimony, please? 3 minutes each, name for the record. And Commissioner Rubio, at this time, I'll be turning the gavel over to you, but I will be listening in. Thank you.
First up, we have Sarah Ianaran.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Sarah Iannarone, and I am the Bicycle Advisory Committee rep to the BBAC, but I'm here today as Executive Director of the Street Trust, which represents street users from across Greater Portland. We work at the literal intersections of an ongoing transportation crisis that threatens lives and livelihoods, and we believe that we can stop preventable death resulting from inequality, lack safety, and climate change. I am a registered lobbyist with the City of Portland. Before we proceed talking about transportation in the abstract, it's important to think about and honor the 73 people killed in traffic while using Portland streets last year and the 12 already killed this year. I'd also like to honor June Knightley, who was shot and killed in the street while she was corking a protest this past weekend. Here at the Street Trust, we consider corking an act of civic pride and social justice. Corkers put their bodies in harm's way so that others can exercise their First Amendment rights safely in our streets. Thank you. I submitted a letter in writing to your offices prior to this hearing. I'll run through a few high-level points quickly, then leave the details to colleagues more knowledgeable on the topic. The Street Trust supports the pricing options for equitable mobility POEM task force on pricing strategies to advance climate, equity, and mobility goals in the City of Portland. We believe this process and its outcomes are a model for how cities should be thinking about pricing their transportation systems. The revenue proposals under consideration today are a step, albeit a baby step, in the right direction toward advancing that policy goal. In particular, we appreciate PBOT's commitment to managing demand for drive-alone trips by more accurately pricing the right-of-way and directing that revenue toward providing safe options to driving alone through tools like the transportation wallet and bike sharing. Portland is experiencing an epidemic of traffic fatalities, and the most vulnerable people in our city are paying for our inaction with their lives. The connection between parking prices and safety might not seem clear, but transportation demand management, of which parking pricing is an important tool, has a direct connection to the vehicle miles traveled in our city. Reducing VMT saves lives along with saving money and greenhouse gas emissions. Pricing reforms done the way the POEM task force recommends have large benefits for safety, pollution reduction, fitness, and access while reducing congestion and generating revenue. The Street Trust supports the work of our partners at the Parking Reform Network in emphasizing that City Council needs to stop setting parking rates at the council level and vest that authority with PBOT so they can implement the performance-based parking management policy that Council approved in 2018. To that end, and with the understanding that the COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on our transportation system along with all the other ones, we offer our support of the proposal on the table today. This support comes with the caveat that we can't come back again in support of more baby steps toward POEM implementation. Our funders, members, and community partners demand a more rapid transition off the fossil fuel economy and more sustainable funding mechanisms for citywide access to safe, affordable transportation options for people walking, rolling, and riding transit. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Tony Jordan.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you, Sarah, for that eloquent acknowledgement of those whose lives have been lost on our city streets. My name is Tony Jordan. I served on the last committee that recommended a price increase in 2015. I served on POEM, and I've served on several other parking committees. I'm president of a parking policy reform nonprofit, the Parking Reform Network, which puts me in a somewhat unique position to evaluate our parking policies relative to other cities. This should be the last vote that Portland City Council ever takes to set the price of parking. What is the right price for parking? I don't know, and neither do any of you. And that is not a slight. There's no reason you should know. Frankly, this is a determination that is not worthy of your attention and time. There are other problems in the city that deserve your focus. I support these rate adjustments, but the reason our curb parking is underpriced is not because of inflation. It's because of inaction. And that inaction is the result of the requirement that the City Council set rates itself rather than allowing PBOT to properly implement the performance-based parking management policy which Council approved in 2018. As explained by my mentor, Donald Shoup, in The High Cost of Free Parking, to find the right price, we must adjust the rate and hours of enforcement until there is roughly one open parking space on every block face. This provides convenience for visitors and reduces congestion caused by those searching for a parking place. PBOT would survey occupancy regularly and adjust rates iteratively. In Seattle, this is done quarterly, and that would be a good start. After a few adjustments, some parts of the central city may be relatively expensive to park in, and other parts would likely be cheaper than they are today. And that's a benefit of pricing by demand. Cost-sensitive Portlanders can save money by parking a bit farther away. Another benefit is that the Bureau can respond quickly to unanticipated conditions, such as pandemic shutdowns. I'm convinced that if we would continue to require a city council vote on every adjustment, they will be onerous and not timely enough, and implementation of POEM and other best-of-class transportation policies we've adopted will be impossible. Proper parking management is important. It's key to meeting climate action and transportation goals. The best practices require less of your attention rather than more. So let this be the last time we ever have a hearing to set parking meter rates, I hope. And when we come back with the next stage of POEM, I hope that we give PBOT the authority to do its job and get this policy implemented. Thank you.
Next up, we have Vivian Satterfield.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Vivian Satterfield. I work for Better Day. I was part of the POEM strategy team that stewarded the process and brought forward the recommendations that have been referenced and that was adopted by Council. I want to give gratitude. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for your continued leadership, and to all the staff at PBOT for this dedicated work. POEM really was like grad school for transportation pricing. I've learned so much through that process. But we're also fortunate to have experts in our community like Tony Jordan, who I'm testifying afterwards, and a really wide universe of study around these issues. So while it's not unique to Portland, I think what is unique to us here is our values and the principles that we set forward in the POEM process. So I just want to remind Council, the principles for pricing for equitable mobility and what they've included. It includes that pricing holds this promise as a strategy to help move people and goods in a more efficient, climate-friendly, and equitable way, but only if it's designed, implemented, and adjusted with intention. And when Commissioner Hardesty came to one of the closing POEM meetings, where I really saw her leadership and engagement on was just talking about how this would impact the most vulnerable people. And that's something that I've been really grappling with as well in my own role as a transportation justice advocate who's been working in the city for over 10 years, is to really try to think about, can we be guaranteed that we won't do further harm and further price out folks who are most impacted by the rising costs? And I don't have an answer. I don't think that it can be found in a study, but I do think that we need to take some action on this. And I do think that the process that we've set forward and the principles that we've set out and the folks who are working on this in a dedicated way have done all that we can to this point. And the next thing we have to do is take some action. And then we will learn more, and then we can do more, and then we can do better and adjust from there. So that's why I'm supportive of this current proposal that is in front of you today. As mentioned before by my colleagues, it really is a preliminary step, but it is a step in the right direction. I do also think that the revenue being directed towards mobility justice, the ideas and a greater expansion of transportation options for folks who currently lack that, such as the transportation wallet, is very positive as well. And I do look forward to more people understanding what that transportation wallet actually does and can take advantage of that. There's a lot of challenges right now with unmet revenue needs. And there's lots of work happening both at the regional and state level that can help local jurisdictions like ourselves have greater flexibility and find new sources of revenue. And I'll be here for that as well. So thank you very much.
Next up, we have Sarah Wright.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I'm Sarah Wright, Transportation Program Director at Oregon Environmental Council. OEC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, membership-based organization that works to advance innovative, collaborative, and equitable solutions to Oregon's environmental challenges for today and future generations. OEC supports raising the parking rates as proposed by PBOT. We participated in the pricing options for equitable mobility process, and we look forward to seeing the City of Portland build on this first effort to turn our recommendations into the necessary structures, such as performance-based parking, for a more sustainable and equitable transportation system. We appreciate that the revenue will be directed to programs like the Transportation Wallet, which makes it easier for low-income families to get around the region. It's crucial for the goals of POEM that the revenue from the raised fees be used to provide more access for low-income households. Our transportation system currently prioritizes the convenience of people who have easy access to driving alone. People who are physically able to drive can get a driver's license and can afford the nearly $10,000 a year it costs the average driver to purchase, maintain, insure, and fuel a vehicle. This prioritization means that the benefits of the system, access to jobs, education, services, and community, are not available to people who don't meet that description. This is particularly egregious given that the burdens of the system, air toxics, noise pollution, traffic violence, the loss of so much public space to car movement and storage, and the effects of climate change are experienced more intensely by the same people who are less able to take advantage of the benefits. This rate raise will allow Portland to invest a little more in the people who are most heavily burdened and the least benefited by the status quo. As acknowledged, the larger picture here is that PBOT must shift toward revenue streams that reflect the goals of the city. It is in the city's interest to use pricing to manage the use of public infrastructure to support a thriving, efficient, equitable, and sustainable region. It is not in the city's interest for the budget of the Transportation Bureau to be dependent on burning fossil fuel. Portland, like every other government entity in this country, must break this connection and find a more sustainable way to fund the maintenance and improvement of its transportation system. We look forward to bold steps from the city to get us there. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Next up, we have Reza Farhoudi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. Hello, my name is Reza Farhoudi. I'm with the Pearl District Neighborhood Association, but I'm speaking today on behalf of myself. I'd like to echo what previous testimony has said and provide cautious support for this proposal. I'm someone who's been intimately involved with the city's parking planning processes over the last 6 years. I've served on several committees along with Tony and some other folks. And I want to say that, this is a good first step, like others have said, but we really need to make sure that performance parking is started in earnest once these changes go through. And one thing I wanted to also focus on is hours. One of the things that we talked about at the Performance Parking Manual Committee was setting expanded hours for parking, especially in areas that have that are hotspots for nightlife and have demand after the typical commute, business hours. So that's something that I want to see the city tackle on as well. I also want to focus a little bit on the 20 cents proposed surcharge. I think it's a great first step to start implementing the recommendations in the poem. There's some really good recommendations that came out of that work. One of the things that we've been focused on in the Central City is the expansion of Transportation Wallet. So for folks who may not know, we actually have quite a bit of low-income residents who live in the Pearl District. If you include the entire North Downtown area with Nato Parkway, which is very near the Pearl District, we have almost 2,000 affordable housing units. Based on data that the city had collected, the Pearl District had a lower median household income than the citywide average. And the Pearl District also has a renter occupied household rate of 6 times higher than the city as a whole. So there's a lot of needs, not just in East Portland and North Portland. There's certainly needs there, but I just want to make it clear that we have a lot of affordable housing, a lot of folks that need increased transportation access. Not just people who live in the Pearl District, also those who work in service jobs in downtown and in the Central City. And so it's really important for us to see that Transportation Wallet program expand to serve those low-income residents and employees in the Central City and in the Pearl District. It's also important for us to see that those quick build projects, however those are decided to get built, that those are doled out in equitable fashion and to the extent that they could benefit those who commute in and out of downtown, that would be extremely beneficial as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Next up, we have Ariadna Falcon Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Ariadna Falcon Gonzalez, and I'm the Getting There Together DTT Coalition Manager. DTT is a multicultural, multi-generational coalition that centers and uplifts the voices and needs of people most impacted by transportation inequities through education, advocacy, access, and leadership. We envision a world where Black, Indigenous, people of color, youth, people with disabilities, older adults, and low-income communities have meaningful participation in the creation of an accessible, affordable, equitable, and climate-friendly transportation system. GTT supports PBOT's revenue strategy to achieve budget stabilization, advance policy goals. GTT especially supports the parking, climate, and equitable mobility 20-cent transaction fee to be used for transportation affordability programs and to better understand the impact of the fee on low-income users of the system, as well as outreach around existing programs for low-income households. Vulnerable populations need to be prioritized in the process as the pricing options for equitable mobility POEM process and plan work to address. People who may qualify for mitigation programs like the Transportation Wallet need to be aware that they are eligible for these programs before paying fees. Equitable processes must be at the forefront of all revenue strategies introduced by the City of Portland. GTT supports this revenue strategy because it is following the POEM principles, response to the urgency set out in the task force suggestions, and supports the future implementation of POEM recommendations. The revenue strategy will demonstrate to people who drive the climate impact of driving and parking while supporting current programs that benefit disadvantaged communities and provide them with different modes of transportation that combat dependency on single vehicle driving. GTT looks forward to continued collaboration with PBOT to implement POEM task force recommendations that advance equitable structures that benefit those who have been disadvantaged by our current transportation system. Thank you all.
That completes testimony.
Thank you, Keelan. Commissioner Hardesty, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, we're happy to answer any questions anyone may have. But if you don't mind, President Rubio, like saying that has a nice ring to it. If you don't mind, President Rubio, I just want to take a moment and really appreciate both the POEM community members who volunteered 2 years during the height of COVID to really think thoughtfully about transportation justice. And I want to really appreciate the incredible staff at PBOT who took this challenge seriously, that we needed to address both the economic downturn currently, but also to do it from a position of values around climate mitigation and transportation justice. So I just want to take a moment to just thank Chris and his team for the incredible work that they've done, and the POEM volunteers who gave us some excellent input. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Maps, then Mayor Wheeler.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer Rubio. And thanks to staff and everyone who showed up today to testify. This is really important work, and the presentation was quite compelling. I also want to say and really underscore, from my understanding, PBOT faces a structural budget problem, and I'm glad to see us begin to think about how we can fix that problem. But from the presentation, I don't understand how one of the proposals on the table addresses the decrease in general transportation revenue. So I don't know if this is for Director Warner or for someone else. Director Warner, can you explain to us how the climate and equity mobility fee addresses your budget problem?
Part of that is some of the programs that we would fund with that are things that are priorities for us that we probably would have funded with GTR had we not get this additional dollars. So it is, in a way, I think it will be able to do some of the things we weren't able to get to. It won't really solve our budget problem, but it does kind of start the process of showing, the cost of that. But a lot of the programs that we'll probably be able to invest in, we probably wouldn't be able to do. So, or otherwise we would have had to have made other choices. So we would have had to cut more maintenance in order to fund these really important programs. So a lot of times it is part of we talked about baby steps in terms of us continuing to kind of meet our goals. I don't know, Ryan, if there's anything else you want to add to that, or is that accurate?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And let me also just add, it doesn't impact the $4 billion maintenance backlog that we have. So again, this is a small step in the right direction, but it will not solve all the problems in the Bureau of Transportation financially.
Yeah, no, that was a great question, Commissioner, in terms of it is just a piece of a small piece of the puzzle.
And I want to say, I'm a big fan of the Transportation Wallet program. I want to see that grow and expand and be accessible to everyone who needs it. Has PBOT explored the possibility of there being other funding sources that support clean energy programs like this that might support a Transportation Wallet?
Yeah, absolutely. There are all of the sources. I mean, really, as we're trying to meet those goals, any of the sources of revenue that we're looking at would probably be supporting programs such as the Transportation Wallet, because right now we're not doing it enough. And certainly, a lot of some of the money comes from our parking permit system, and so we might be able to supplement some of the Transportation Wallet with some of those funds as we get closer to breaking even on those.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, President Rubio, for stepping in and presiding. So my thinking is along the lines of Commissioner Maps. Number one, could you tell us a little bit about the Transportation Wallet? Several of our testifiers talked about the importance of it. Commissioner Maps has reiterated and underscored the importance of it, but nobody really discussed what it was. And I think there's an opportunity here to build some public support. Director, could you tell us a little bit more about the Transportation Wallet and why it is so important to so many people?
Sure. I might even turn that over to staff in order to I don't know if Chris or Art wants to jump in terms of a more articulate discussion of that. So I'll let Art jump in.
Thanks, Art.
Sure. So the Transportation Wallet is a mechanism to allow community members to have access to a transit pass, a bike share, scooter share, various elements. We have a couple different programs. One of them is focused specifically at low-income communities, where we are offering that benefit. It's really similar to a universal basic mobility. We're providing the access to that mobility. And then in our parking districts, we allow people to forgo getting access to a parking space and instead getting this access as a benefit to have these other mobility options. So it's a great program allowing people to relieve the pressure on our parking system and get some benefits for their individual mobility to access the system.
I think this is one of the better programs run through PBOT. If somebody's listening and they're interested in this or think they might benefit from it, where can they go to get more information?
Should be on our website. I'll see if I can find a link real quickly.
Very, very good. And then my second question is a budget question. It's a little more boring, maybe. If the director, somebody could talk to us about what the consequences of not being able to replace these budgetary dollars based on carbon fuel revenues would be. Do we have a sense of do nothing?
I think the mayor gotten into a better space. Are you familiar?
Yeah,
we can hear you better now. You sounded like you were talking in slow motion for a minute.
Oh, well, that's usually me anyway. I'll cut my question short. If we do not pass this and the additional revenues don't come forward, what is at risk? What services are at risk of being lost to the public?
Yeah, Ryan, you can go. I mean, we're talking significant dollars in terms of we will be out of balance on the fifth year, and we will have to make probably more significant cuts. Brian, if you want to talk numbers.
Yeah, the consequence for this year is we'd be a shortfall of probably another $3.5 to $4 million in our budget. So we'd be looking to make that ongoing reductions in this year's budget. And then, just as we talked about in our earlier slides, basically our problem is that inflation is always outpacing our revenues. And so the consequence of that is we'd be taking reductions every year in the amount of our inflationary increases to basically balance our 5-year forecast. So if our forecast is going to go up, if inflation's another 3.5%, we'd be probably looking at, somewhere in that range of 3.5% reductions to our ongoing discretionary revenues to be able to balance it.
And that would
And
be
so
on top of doing it every year.
These are all operating dollars. So these are, these are consumer-facing services that would be lost, correct? Can you give us a couple of examples of what types of services might be at risk?
Yeah, sure. I can just jump in. I mean, a good portion of our revenues do go to maintenance operations. So that's, maintaining bridges and structures, green spaces, those types of items. A good portion goes to just maintaining sort of basic parking operations. So making sure that, our parking districts are up and running, our abandoned auto and derelict RV program, parking enforcement, and those types of items. We have good investment of our ongoing general transportation revenues that go to support different parts of our capital improvement and safety mobility. So crossings, safety improvement, ADA ramps, sidewalks, lighting, infill, those types of items.
And also, as we said earlier, we use this money also for match. So to get any kind of grants or anything, sometimes we'll need match. And so sometimes we'll have to use a GTR for that if we can't use things like SDC. So.
Great. Thank you very much. And I appreciate that. Thanks to everybody who testified. And I'm sorry for the lousy connection.
That's okay.
Great. Is there any other council discussion or questions?
I have one. I think this one's probably goes back to staff. I want to explore some territory that came up during testimony. I think this is goes back to Tony, maybe. Director Warner, I'm interested in the performance-based parking space. Right now, how often can PBOT change parking rates, and under what conditions?
Parking rates on street, it comes with the council resolution. So generally either through the fee ordinance or I guess council could do it at any other time. So it has to go through council. It's a council initiated, and then they have to do it. And I mean, that's the process.
Sure. And if we were to do dynamic parking or I was under the impression right now you can pretty much, the rules allow you to change parking rates just once a year or so, but no, we can do that more often. This is probably more of a statement than a question. I sure hope that you folks consider the possibility of either giving PBOT the authority to change these rates without having to come back to council, and even perhaps change them more often. I can imagine situations where we might have a different rate depending on time of day or whatnot. I think if you're going to find that equilibrium that you're looking for, you need more flexibility than I see you have right now.
I appreciate that, Commissioner. And we'll also send you a copy of the report, the performance-based pricing report that I don't think you were quite at council yet, that we produced in 2018. And a lot of it is kind of the technological challenge, but technology changes. Sure. So we're excited to see what we can do to implement a more dynamic pricing regime.
Great, I look forward to that. Thank you.
And let me say that this is Madam President, if I may.
Please.
I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Mapps. Commissioner Mapps, you may be aware that this state is also looking at a congestion pricing / tolling program. And so we don't want to make any permanent changes at the moment because we don't want to overburden people. So voting for what we have in front of you today gives us the ability to continue to move forward while the state is working out what the state's going to do. Because, we will have to make sure that, again, we're not overburdening public transit users or people who drive their automobiles because, wherever they go, there'll be somebody charging them money. So we're trying to do it very systemically. And I will say that so much of the work that PBOT has done helping small businesses come out of COVID they were not charged for. And so, having a bureau that is very responsive without actually having a budget to support that responsiveness is a bit of a challenge, but they've done a great job so far. So I think this is the right approach at this time, but this is a fluid process because as the state solidifies its process, we will be able to make more ongoing decisions. As all of our speakers said, yeah, this is great for a tiny step forward, but a lot depends on how the state conversations move as well.
Commissioner, before we close, Madam President, I just really wanted to thank the PBOT staff who have put just a ton of work into this. And it's just not over the past couple of months pulling this together. It's when we go back to the performance-based parking and all the other work they've done. It's just a tremendous honor to work with these folks, and they've really moved the ball forward, and I really appreciate it. So, Ryan, I didn't get the memo in terms of dressing up. So you look great, I gotta say.
I agree. Ryan looks fabulous. And Chris, you are a fabulous leader. We are lucky to have you leading our transportation division. And I try not to say that too often because it makes him nervous when I say nice things to him. But I'm not going to let him say nice things about his staff without saying nice things about him. And Ryan, you do look really good. You were ready for this today. Thank you all. I really appreciate PBOT's dedicated staff and bringing this forward. Great work.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty and Director Warner. Is there any further council discussion? Okay, if there's no further discussion, Keelan, will you please call the roll?
Rubio.
I want to thank Commissioner Hardesty for bringing this resolution forward, and also Director Warner and the PBOT staff for all of your great work on this. Also grateful to all the those who testified today. It's really clear that PBOT has taken a lot of thoughtful work into this project to ensure that your funding strategies better align with our city's priorities of moving away from fossil fuel dependence, and as well as being in alignment with pricing options for equitable mobility recommendations. And that's not something that's something we need to do more of here at the city, is following our own task force recommendations. So I really appreciate that point. And it's a great template for others to follow. The rate increases are always a hard decision, but in these times where climate is increasingly a reality and should be part of our decision-making and needs to be factored into assessing the true cost of things, this is a very needed step, and it makes sense. In ensuring that we continue delivering critical services for Portland. So very much support this work. I look forward to also more work with BPS and PBOT partnering to meet our climate and equity goals. So I vote aye.
Ryan.
Yes, thank you for bringing this forward, Commissioner Hardesty. And it's good to see you, Director Warner. And Ryan, great presentation. You really broke it down very clearly on when you did the finances. That was very helpful. And if I was tracking this along, someone made a comment that this hopefully will be the last time that we'll be having dialogue about the tactical rate increases and more move towards aligning our values with the revenue streams. And that's a big deal, and that's bold. But today, here we are. Today is a day that we need to make sure that we survive. And so today I will hopefully be voting on one of the last big parking adjustments in this fashion. And I'll be rooting for you and look forward to the really hard dialogue about how we really do move forward with aligning our values with our revenue streams. So this is simple on the surface and wildly complicated in the details. So thank you all for your service. The testimony was great. And thank you for those who have invested in the grad school assignment of being a volunteer for this work. I vote aye.
Hardesty.
Once again, I want to thank Director Warner. I want to thank Ryan and Art and all the team at PBOT for their hard work on this. I have been Transportation Commissioner for 13 months now. And I can tell you that the staff at PBOT is hardworking, they're dedicated, they're problem solvers. I've never met anyone in PBOT that if a problem was presented to them, they didn't try to figure out how to solve the problem. And that says a lot about the leadership. It says a lot about the people who've called PBOT home for a long time. And it also says something about the fact that employees at PBOT last a long time. I just signed a whole bunch of certificates. we have a lot of employees who've been with us for a long time, and they are committed to the outcomes that we seek. So I am pleased to vote aye, and to say again, thank you so much, PBOT. You are a joy to work with, and I look forward to the other great stuff we do together.
Maps.
I want to thank PBOT staff, Commissioner Hardesty, and members of the public who testified today. The work that you are doing on this project, I think, is some of the most important work that is being done in the city today. I'm encouraged by the progress you have made so far, and I look forward to see where this discussion goes. For those reasons and more, I vote aye.
Wheeler.
I would like to add my thanks to everybody who testified today, and to Director Warner, to Commissioner Hardesty and your team. Look, this is one of the tougher issues that government's wrestling with right now at the local level. We have an entire system of transportation planning, operations, implementation, maintenance that is based upon the assumption that people will continue to live off of carbon-based fuels. And we know that our climate action imperative dictates that we move away from carbon-based fuels, which means we're going to be moving away from carbon-based revenue, which means we have to find alternative ways to address the ongoing and very real needs around transportation in our society. We're doing this at exactly the same time where there's broad acknowledgement that the impacts of climate change have disproportionately impacted lower income people and people of color in particular. And that is not theoretical, that is a demonstrable fact. And so we're wrestling not only with brass tack issues of how do we pay for services that the public needs, that the public requires for our community to continue to function at a high level, but we're also dealing with issues of justice and equity at the same time. And again, I can't think of any thornier issue than dealing with these in a comprehensive manner. Long gone are the days when a city council would gather around and we talk about how do we fill the potholes. That is one of many problems we deal with, but these are some of the weightier structural problems that we also have to address as local leaders. And I really want to thank people in the community who, we had a number of people testify today, Sarah, Vivian, others who've been looking at these issues for a long time from different perspectives and pushing us to think more broadly and innovate. And at the end of the day, I think that's going to be necessary for us to continue to have significant engagement from the community to find the right ways to do this. As I went through this proposal, this resolution, I found the ideas proposed here to be common sense. I found them to be smart. I found them to be in alignment with the changes that are taking place around the revenue streams. And frankly, and this is directed towards Director Warner, I think these are financially responsible steps for you to take. You have to acknowledge, and you are acknowledging, that your revenue structure is slowly collapsing as the structure of our energy economy changes. So are these the best steps forward? As many people said today, they're the ones that seem to make the most sense. They are relatively low-hanging fruit. We should absolutely move forward. I am happy to join my colleagues in voting aye and supporting this resolution.
Great. The resolution is adopted.
Excuse me, Madam President. I just like really saying that a lot. If I would like to add one more thank you.
Sure.
And it's to Derek Bradley, my policy director. He spends most of his life with PBOT staff, and just wanted to appreciate his work to bring this resolution to us today. So thank you, Derek. Did not want to miss out on that one. I have to work with him again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Okay, so the resolution is adopted. So Keelan, can we please move on to the next item?
140, authorize grant agreements with the Black United Fund of Oregon and the Oregon Community Foundation for amount not to exceed $950,000 for Black Youth Leadership Fund programming.
Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Hardesty.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hardesty.
Okay, Mayor, thank you. I'm happy to start. Give me just a moment, good people, excuse me. Let me just say, I want to start this conversation by really thanking the mayor's office. In the summer of 2020, after hundreds of days of protests, there was an opportunity for the city council to actually walk our talk and invest in Black youth in our community. I will, as you know, in 2021 budget, responding to the Black Lives protests for racial justice and police accountability, I made a pledge that we would develop a fund that would invest in the leadership development of Portland's Black youth. These community investments aim to help close the racial inequality gap locally by providing our youth opportunities for leadership and prosperity. I'm thankful to Mayor Wheeler for his support at that time and his ongoing support of this very important program. The Black Youth Leadership Program is a leadership development and healing program led by Black people in service to Black youth. The city of Portland has a history of disinvestment in Black communities. This includes redlining, residential segregation, gentrification, and neighborhood disinvestments in areas like Vanport and Albina. This has undermined the social and educational equality of Black Portlanders for generations. For example, just look at the graduation gap in Portland public schools between Black and white students. In 2021, 75.5% of Black youth graduated on time, as compared to 92.8% of white youth. The establishment of the Black Youth Leadership Development Fund in partnership with the Black United Fund of Oregon and the Oregon Community Foundation will use evidence-based, culturally grounded engagement processes to grow the leadership and entrepreneurial skills of Portland's Black youth and offer them access to empowerment from inside out, which can potentially influence their trajectory for generations. Earlier today, I got a tour of the former Albina Arts Center, where programming will occur for our youth, and I couldn't be more excited. Now, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. Today, we will hear from Dr. S. Renee Mitchell and Niyati Dunsing. Dr. S. Renee Mitchell is an educator, a poet, a playwright, a multimedia artist and author, and community healer and visionary. I could use 25 more adjectives, but we are short on time. She is a 2019-20 Spirit of Portland Award winner, and Multnomah County honored her as a 2021 Gladys McCoy Lifetime of Excellence Award. During Dr. Mitchell's 25 years as an award-winning former newspaper journalist, she was nominated twice for the Pulitzer Prize and was the #1 columnist in 5 Western states while working at the Oregonian. She's also a dedicated heartivist and a trained community health worker, which has resulted in multiple community awards for her dedicated empowerment of her community with her skills as a project manager, grant writer, performer, and researcher. In late 2018, Dr. Mitchell became the visionary founder of a nationally award-winning youth development program called I Am More. And MORE stands for Making Ourselves Resilient Every Day, which started as an intergenerational Spreading the Black Joy virus campaign. Dr. Mitchell holds a Doctor of Education degree from the University of Oregon, where she refined her strong research agenda around helping Black youth heal from trauma, racial and otherwise, which is often a focus of her consulting, facilitation, and professional development trainings. This spring, Dr. Mitchell is publishing her book titled In My Power, I Empower Moving Black Youth from Spirit Murderer to Emotional Emancipation. That is Dr. S. Renee Mitchell. Niete is the Director of Community Engagement at Oregon Community Foundation. She has over 15 years of experience in developing, managing, and evaluating community engagement initiatives and programs. Through tools such as community engagement, grant making, and research, she has led a statewide team responsible for listening, learning, and responding to the needs facing those most impacted in Oregon. Prior to Oregon Community Foundation, Niete led the community outreach and engagement team at OHSU Knight Cancer Institute, where she co-developed several initiatives aimed at addressing cancer health disparities from prevention to access to care, including the Community Partnership Program. She is dedicated to leveraging her role in philanthropy to increase impact and advance equitable outcomes. It's an honor to have both of you at City Council today, and I will turn it over to Dr. Mitchell. And I will ask my colleagues if you will hold your questions until the end of the formal presentation, and then I'd love us to have a conversation. Dr. Mitchell, please. Unless the mayor wants to. Mayor, would you like to make an opening statement?
I think you did a beautiful job, and I appreciate the partnership with you, Commissioner Hardesty, and I appreciate your leadership. And colleagues, I'm going to ask the Council President, Commissioner Rubio, to continue to preside for the remainder of the meeting, even though you can see me. Thank you.
Please, Dr. Mitchell.
So thank you so much for the introduction, Commissioner Hardesty, and the partnership, Mayor Wheeler, and also Madam President Rubio. I like saying that too. I do have a presentation that I'd like to share with you. So this is, I'm going to choose share sound. How do I do this? The PowerPoint.
Hey, Keelan, we're happy to help you if you need it.
Yeah,
okay.
If you need help.
So it says a PowerPoint is unknown. So I'm wondering if Kristen can help me with her version of my PowerPoint. There we go. Can we make it, what? Thank you so much. Okay, so this presentation might be a little bit different than what you all have expected, but I feel like it's important to, as was talked about, aligning the values of why I do the work that I do. So it's really intended to help you understand the depth of the need for healing in Black youth and also connection and community building. And so this is called When Will We Learn? Because there is an intention sometimes to think about when we talk about the graduation rate, for example, you know, and the ways that Black youth are not meeting certain goals, educational goals. It sometimes is talked about from a deficit point of view. And my point is that it's not their heads that are not working, it's that their hearts are broken. And so what I'm going to share with you is research-based. It's very healing-centered. And this is something that I have found because I've been doing this work that really, really is effective for Black youth. And so I also have my team around me, and I may be pulling them in to be able to explain some things as well. So next slide, please. So for those of you, you know, you've heard my introduction, and I'm going to move past there to go to the next slide because, you know, you guys have already gotten to know me a little bit, but I do want you to know a little bit more about I Am More. So it's very, very much heart-centered work for me. It's culturally nurturing. It's definitely based on the strengths of the youth that we work with. And we're not ashamed to say that we love our youth. We pour in our perspective about how we work with youth is as master gardeners, and we do not have to tell seeds what to become, right? We know that the potential for resiliency, for creativity, for brilliance is already within them, and it's what we do to nurture the ground to bring that out. So our approach is this is what we do and how we do this. We are joyful and we are empowered, and we want the youth to, we want to create something that they deserve. Next slide, please. So in order for you to really understand the way that I go about this work, I need to share some things about that you haven't heard in my bio, and it will further explain my values and why I go about the work that I do in the way that I do it. Next slide, please. So I want to take you back to my childhood, where I really felt invisible. I was a middle child, and I don't know how many of you are middle children, but we come with our own issues, right? And so I think about how I was feeling. I felt like I was a punctuation mark, and I say this because I'm a writer. And when you think about a punctuation mark, it has a purpose to fill. But yet I was really, really bullied at home. You see my family. There is 8 children plus my aunt is in the back. So the arrow points to me. I was really bullied a lot when I was growing up. I was bullied at home by my older brothers. I was bullied at school. I was often the only Black child in my classroom. And so whatever reason people wanted to point out that made me different, that became a point of really insecurity and shame. Next slide. So you could see me right in the front there. And there was only one other Black child in the picture, and they had 2 different classrooms. So they put us in different classrooms. And this is a piece that I wrote when I was 7 years old. And at the end, I'm talking about how there are parts in life where you have to defend yourself from bullies. So even at a young age, I was always in this situation where I was looking for what was going to happen next, what shoe was going to drop next. It was very much a constant state of hyperactivity about what someone was going to do to me. And so the trauma was deep, and I felt very, very isolated. Next slide. So this is when my life changed at age 11. My father had a very simple thing happen to him. He loved children, as you could have seen from the picture, and he loved to play basketball with Black boys in particular. And so one day, one of the boys landed on his Achilles heel when he was playing basketball, and he was in a cast, and he started having some pain, so he got admitted to the hospital. And later, the doctor my mother had to sue the hospital because the doctor refused to treat him because it was a white hospital, and they refused to treat a Black male in their hospital. And so he had a blood clot that moved up his heart and stopped his heart. And so my mother was unexpectedly a widow with 8 children. And so she had her own trauma growing up. So she was basically pretty emotionally unavailable. So I felt like my life was kind of worthless. And so at age 13 was when I first considered committing suicide. I just didn't believe that I mattered. I didn't believe people cared about me. And that is important for you to know because we don't often, when we run into people, we don't know their story. So you're going to hear a little bit more about my story because it shaped my way of what I do in the world and why I do it. Next slide, please. So we moved from Northern California after my father passed. We moved to rural Oregon, where it was really, really difficult. Again, I was the only Black kid in my classroom. For several years, I was the only Black kid in the whole high school. Some of you may have read my editorial that I wrote for the Oregonian because of the things that are happening around Newburgh High School. But when I was there, I was treated very, very badly, spit on, bullied. There were lines of mostly males who would just yell names at me and push and that kind of thing. And I was told by my teachers that it was not college material. It was really, really difficult. So when I was 15, actually, when my freshman year, I was taking classes at PCC because I wanted to get enough credits to graduate early. My older sisters graduated at 16. And so on my way one day to go to PCC, I was run over by a 14-year-old girl who had stolen a car. So I was in a manual hospital for about 3 months, very depressed, isolated, lots of pain. The doctor initially wanted to cut off my leg because there was so much damage to it. It had completely broken in half and was coming out of the skin. I had a lot of trauma in my body. And so fortunately, there was a doctor who was one of the best orthopedic surgeons who'd agreed to take my case. But the emotional impact of that happening at such a young age, it took its toll. Next slide, please. So at age 17, even though I was told that college was not for me, I still graduated with honors. I was on the honor roll. I received a full academic scholarship, had multiple shortages after that. I left Oregon, which I felt was like the most racist place. And I went to Florida A&M, which is a historically Black college. That was the only place I had ever had a Black teacher. I felt a sense of belonging because I was around kids who accepted me for the first time. But toward my first semester, I was kidnapped and sexually assaulted. And so that put me right back into that place of feeling like nobody cared and I was depressed. And so by the age 20, I remembered sitting on my bed with a gun, and I put it to my head, and because I felt like my life was no longer worth living. And that helped. It was a moment. It was a moment where I really started to understand that I had to do something different. Next slide, please. So I had all of this trauma. And so I'd like you to take a minute to just kind of look at what those things were. The mother wound, the sleeplessness, the grief we never got a chance to really fully grieve my father passing unexpectedly. There was a lot of shame, very, very low self-esteem. And I didn't trust people. I was resentful. I was very angry. I self-sabotaged myself because I didn't feel like I deserved good things. And I was very distrustful, self-critical, very judgmental. And I know that we don't often as adults talk about these things that we go through. But I wanted you all to have an opportunity to really think about what are some of the commonalities of my journey and what you have even experienced for yourself. Next slide, please. So the amygdala, this is what is responsible for our natural bodily reaction to trauma. We fight, we flight, we freeze, we fiddle about. And so my trauma response, which I did not even know until I was maybe a couple years ago, is to freeze. And so now just imagine if I was, because I was a teacher, imagine if I was that kid in my own classroom, or I was abused or overlooked and going to youth programming in Portland, or just a lonely, angry teenager who wants to find a place where they just fit in. How would any of these programs, how would any existing tools that are out there and promoted, how could they have helped me? I just don't think that there would have been a place that would have been able to address some of the things that I was going through. Next slide, please. So I didn't need more discipline. I was a good kid. I obeyed, I listened. It wasn't money that I needed or friends. I needed to heal. And I didn't even realize that I needed to heal because the trauma was so entrenched in my experiences. And so that perspective of what Black youth need is how I'm focusing programming. It is first the healing, to be able to then help them with education, be able to then help them feel connected and that kind of thing. So healing is where we center the work that I do with youth. Next slide, please. So comes out of the research. Black youth are the most prodigiously traumatized adolescent group and they're most traumatized during a time in their lives where they're trying to figure out who they are in relationship to their peers. And so when Black youth are going through trauma, it's more than just, oh, that's a bad thing, or, oh, that's unfortunate thing. It shapes their lives and their perspectives about themselves. Next slide, please. And this is why. This comes out of my research when I was doing my dissertation at the U of O. I did not find myself in this Brofenbrenner ecosystem that kind of breaks down the different things that contribute to who we become as adults. And it starts with, who your family is and where you live and what your peers are. And so what I did, and this is the first time in the country that this has happened, is I broke down all of the different ways that Black youth in particular are affected by each of these ecosystems, including, the friendships and the neighborhood, and then the schools that you go to, the childcare that you're exposed to, the workplace that your parents work in, the media, and how that really starts to affect your personality and your thoughts about yourself, the medical care, and it goes on and on and on. And I had not been able to find anyone who can tell me or help me understand a context of how I grew up as a Black individual and how these things are affecting who I am, how I feel about myself, my opportunities that have become available to me. And so I just felt like it was really important for you all to understand why Black youth are the most traumatized. And it's because of all of these collective experiences that they're encountering. Next slide, please. And you all will have a copy of this. So often in my history, I was often the only Black fill in the blank. As a child, often the only Black student in my classroom. As an adult, often the only Black reporter at some of the 6 or 7 newspapers I worked at. When I got into management, I was the only Black manager that people had been accustomed to, had not been accustomed to, that they had to be responsive to me, right, as their supervisor. I was the only Black columnist at the Oregonian. And when I took a job at Roosevelt High School, which is the most diverse high school in the state, I was the only Black teacher for several years. And so, but within all of this, I knew how to write. You saw the thing that I wrote when I was 7. There are other things that I wrote even before that. I just loved to write because I felt so alone that writing became a way for me to process all of the things that were happening to me. And so not only was I a columnist, I also wrote plays and I wrote songs and I wrote programs. And so people would stop me in the street because they recognized my face, but I still felt this internal unworthiness because of how I grew up. Next slide, please. Now, the trauma also affected my relationships, including my relationships with my children. And I did not even realize until I started doing my doctoral studies and really understanding how trauma affects us and how trauma affects our parenting. And this quote just spoke to my own situation, that adults under too much stress feel like they are fighting for survival. And I never really realized that was what was happening to me. And so I experienced my daughter because we had 2 different trauma responses. Mine was freeze and hers was fight. And so we disconnected because of the trauma that both of us were experiencing. Next slide, please. So on the outside, everyone felt like, oh, Renee Mitchell, the columnist. Oh, Renee Mitchell's doing some stuff at the schools. Oh, Renee Mitchell's doing the stuff in the community. But inside, I felt I was lonely and sad and depressed. And so in the way that Black women are thought about, they're always telling us we're so strong, like we could just deal with anything. And really we're drowning, but we don't feel confident enough or have spaces that we can heal, that we can just process. And so this affects everything in our lives. And this is actually what's also happening with our Black youth. Next slide, please. And so when I became a teacher, I started to understand that, wow, things really haven't changed that much from when I was in school decades ago. Students were coming to me and sharing some of the things that were happening. And it was so familiar. And I had had a lifetime of dealing with trauma, particularly racial trauma. And here I am, the only Black teacher, reviving the Black Student Union, the Black History Month assemblies, started the Black Girl Magic Club. And, I'm trying to just like meet the needs. And I'm seeing all of this trauma and sadness and just grief within the student body. And I knew I had to do something different. Next slide, please. So while I was a teacher at Roosevelt, I started pursuing my doctoral degree. And I realized that I had spent my whole life just trying to survive. I did not understand how to heal. I did not understand I needed to heal. And so I was basically walking through the world just very wounded. And going through the process of getting my doctorate helped me understand that my relationship with trauma and how I could help others be able to heal from the trauma that they were experiencing. Next slide, please. So then all of this was happening, and then the pandemic happened, and it was like it triggered my depression again. And then in September 2020, I got hit by a car for the second time. Was in the same hospital at Emmanuel. And I realized I can't keep doing this. I need to do something different with my life. I need to heal. I need to be able to just not only help myself, but help other people. And so often when there is past trauma that we haven't dealt with, it's still in our bodies and we're triggered by it and it shows up. And then we get bad news, and then we get the pandemic, and then we get the stress. And I saw how it was affecting the young people that I was working with, because I was holding internships during the summer where I was trying to put them through programming. And last summer, we actually had to commit one of the young ladies to a mental health facility because the pandemic, on top of all of this other stuff, really just created havoc on some of the youth that we're encountering. Next slide, please. And so what I started to understand through my research is that when we don't deal with our own childhood trauma, basically we get triggered. And so our unprocessed trauma becomes trauma we transfer to others. And we think it's that other person. We think it's that other driver during the road rage, when it's really about something that triggered within us that needed to heal, but we're focusing on someone else, right? And so I need to deal with my own unprocessed trauma to be able to keep showing up in a very authentic way. And so this is how I'm helping youth, is trying to help them deal with their trauma. So what they encounter from a teacher, what they encounter from people in society, from racism, instead of absorbing that as something that makes you feel like you're inferior and not worthy. This is trauma. Once they heal that, they start to see the world differently and move through the world differently. But at first, it takes a real dedication to heal ourselves from the things that we have experienced. Next slide, please. So this is why I Am More does the work that it does in the way that it does it, right? We are one of very few, and maybe, one of very few that I know of, that has a trifecta seal of approval. Everything that we do is based on research. Everything that we do is based on what does the scholarly research say about what works, particularly for Black youth. And that's what our metric system is all about. We're trying to get to those things that the research says works. We're very much based in theory. And even though in some parts of the country where, they're talking about theory has become a thing, but it's really about our theory is about youth development. That belonging is very much an issue. Doing things in community with others who are their age, like the peer relationship, very much an issue. Giving youth the opportunity to be in charge, to have their voices heard, very much theory-based. And so we are the only ones that we know of, or very few that we know of, that are also evidence-based. That means that my doctoral research was saying, if you do these things with Black youth, you're going to get these outcomes, right? And so we are not only research-based, theory-based, but we're also very much evidence-based. And we are one of the very few who have gotten, we've only been operating about three and a half years, but we've gotten national awards for our culturally relevant curriculum from the Novo Foundation in New York City. So we are centered on healing, connection, creativity, and belonging. That is at the ground that everything that we do for Black youth, because this is what we know works. We don't just say we give youth something to do. We help them figure out and realize who they can become. Next slide, please. So we have a three-step way of doing this. The first step is the inside out. The critical consciousness. We're trying to raise a critical consciousness that what is happening to youth, that they don't really understand, that they have no consciousness about why are teachers treating me this way? Why are people in society treating me this way? We help them understand that this is a system that is designed for their demise, right? And so it allows them to stop feeling like something is wrong with them. And we rechannel their inner rage, because you cannot, not have rage, as James Baldwin would say, and be Black in America. But we want to rechannel that to something much more productive. So we help transform their relationship with trauma, so they stop walking around the world as a victim, but more as a hero of their reimagined story. And then we capitalize on their strengths, and we try to help them understand that to tap into their resilience. Next slides, please. So step 2 is, once we've done that and really help them understand how not to walk through the world as a victim, we help them find their sense of purpose. We help them expose them to different types of opportunities that can give them their spark. We help them give them tools to research their environment, to really be able to analyze what is happening and how can they use their voice to try to have some input, become social justice advocates and change agents, whether it's in their family or their community or their classroom or their school. How can we help them find their voice and their internal wisdom to create social change? Next step. Step 3. So we had inside out, outside up, and then up and beyond. So we give them an opportunity to share their wisdom. We are not the heroes of these young people's stories. We are merely the gardeners that have given them opportunity to blossom and bloom. And so we then want to give them opportunities to share their knowledge and their wisdom. And what we found, because when we started, we didn't know what we were going to do. This has all unfolded, but our first public representation of who we are and what our programming was at the MLK annual tribute that was at Highland. And we had 4 young people who had never shared their stories. And what we found was that once they did, and we held that safe space for them to be able to do this, it changed things, because adults were coming to them in tears and saying, thank you for sharing your story. I found myself through your story. You're so brave for sharing your story. You matter, you're meaningful. And these are kinds of the feedback that youth had never heard before, especially from adults who were strangers to them. And we realized that this was part of something we definitely wanted to incorporate within our programming. And so we also expanded that. We were able to take, through the support of PPS, take 6 young people to Philadelphia, where we opened up our first national conference. And then, so they've kept going. We've done trainings for PPS on from a youth perspective about what do you need from your teachers and the adults. How do you, what does it feel like to belong, and how can we create an environment? We have trained classified staff and teachers for PPS on trauma-informed practices, social emotional learning. So we are putting youth in a position where they are the experts from their own experience. So they are paid to speak, to train, to facilitate. And so in our last internship, we trained youth, facilitate with other youth, and our youth were paid about $7,000 for the summer. But we asked a lot of them, they created their own curriculum based on their own experiences. They held these conversations that youth have never had before about colorism, about racism, about sexism, about, all kinds of things. And so we created a space where healing can happen. Next slide, please. So we're using all of this stuff that we learned, all of the research, to be able to say that we're creating a garden of emotional emancipation. So our seeds are critical consciousness, our social justice activism, arts and creativity is definitely a big part of what we do. And we're pouring that into the ground where the seeds, which are our Black youth, are blossoming. And what we have found through our research is that they have not only resilience, not only the opportunity to bounce back, but empowered resilience, which means that when you are grounded in your power, you start to know who you are, you start to know that you matter, then you're reaching back to help other young people be able to do the same. And it's not only just healing, but radical healing. Like, this is more intense because youth are so traumatized that the healing that they need is not just basic. It has to go a little bit deeper. And so also radical hope. A lot of our youth, especially during the pandemic, have lost their hope and lost their joy. And so we're pouring all of these opportunities in them to re-find and reconnect, because we believe when you reach their heart, then their head will follow. They will be empowering themselves to try to get that A, to try to graduate, to try to go to college, to try to be someone, to try to do something, right? So it has to start from the inside out. And when that happens, our research shows that the kids who have come through I Am More, that this is what happens, is that that's what they do on their own. And so Bettina Love is one of my mentors, and she's talking about how all of this mental health is schools, and they talk about test scores, they talk about graduation rates, they talk about all of these things. And what she said and what we believe is that it will not change until students, particularly Black students, are healing from trauma and starting to matter to themselves, matter to the community, being able to contribute their voices, their skills, their talent. When that happens, they become different people. Our community becomes different. Our schools become different. Next slide, please. So empowered resilience is not an outside in. It's not what well-meaning adults are doing. It's how the youth are able to find themselves within the structure of what we provide. And so what we see is in my power, I empower. That's an agency that there's no dollars that can really buy that. That is such a sense of internal empowerment from these young people. And that is what keeps us doing what we do, because we just love seeing this kind of response from this type of programming. Next slide, please. So Justice English is one of, she's on the line, and she is one of the 3 young people who inspired the founding of I Am More. So I definitely want to honor her and her perspective. What you see, this graphic novel, so many young people have dealt with trauma but are ashamed of it, right? But what we did is turn that around and reflected how that trauma has helped her understand her own sense of power and being able to make decisions. And so what we started to do is we use creative projects to try to help young people know that they are more than their trauma. And so they started saying, well, how can I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story, because it's no longer shame now. It's like, wow, this has taught me so much about myself and who I am and how strong I really am. And so I want Justice to unmute, and be able to share a little bit about her helping found I Am More. She's now at a full rack. Oh, I'll let her tell you about that. Justice, can you unmute? Is it possible?
Yeah, I can unmute. Sorry, I just got out of class. I'm outside. I don't want to go in the house yet because I have a child. He's gonna go crazy. So, yeah. But anyways, my name is Justice Serenity English. It's my 3rd year at U of O. Dr. Renee was my teacher at Roosevelt High School since my freshman year. So we know each other about a while. I started doing poetry as Miss Renee did. I didn't know some of the stuff that she shared actually today about being young. I used to write stuff down, and that's what got me into just writing and doing stuff. And then once I got to high school, I met Miss Renee. And she introduced me to poetry and stuff, and that got me to being able to networking, sharing and connecting with people, sharing my story and that kinds of stuff will also influence me, because she taught me if you have a skill, you should never be broke. So I was like, okay. And then so she influenced me to sharing. Sorry, my nose is running. It's cold outside. And sharing and then making money. So that it was a way for me to also understand myself, like she was talking about, but also find ways to support yourself, which I thought was very impactful. Then years down the line and got to my junior year, not thinking really about much about college, and then started writing more, and then that influenced me to like do scholarships and stuff like that. I had to Beat the Odds, which was one of my first scholarships with two other girls. I also go to one goes to U of O, one goes to PSU. And like from there, I started doing more scholarships and stuff like that. And I am more starting to get interested. Ms. Dr. Renee had ideas like there's something here that she realized that in the school of color, there's a lot of trauma and stuff that she also experienced because her being the only teacher of color, we got to connect to her on a different level because we shared the same experiences, which I think empowered a lot of us, you know, people that was there, even like shy people that probably when it comes to her class, you know, we talk about her, hear about her, you know, they'll speak about her. So yeah, and then one of the biggest things she wanted me to share, I don't know if I want to share, it's like a poem that I'm like always doing. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. The third year at U of O, doing good. Major in ethnic studies, a minor in Black studies and leadership administration. My goal is like becoming a teacher, but my biggest goal is like having a program. Kind of like I Am More, but it's more focused on like housing and, let me take a deep breath, housing and financial stability. So yeah. That's a little bit about that. And I don't know, I'm still working on it, you know, it's taking my time. But the goal right now is to go to, I love the idea of being a Black teacher because I see what it gives to students.
So that's what I wanted to ask you. You want to be a teacher. What do you want to teach?
I want to do ethnic studies, but I also want to do, so I'm taking a class called Afrofuturism, which is like so amazing, but I'm learning the difference between African and Afrofuturism. So I'm like headed to the idea of like science fiction, you know, like, sorry, excuse me, actually. I haven't talked to no one actually in a while. So it feels good to get it out. So yeah, I was telling my friends and stuff like a couple of people like science fiction, I think, is where the heart is imagining the world to be more like Black and African and things that we can imagine, like, you know, Wakanda and the movie Us, Lovecraft Country, like there's a lot of stuff you guys got to read or watch. And authors like Octavia Butler and stuff like that. But just imagine it in a more a Black settings. I think I'll have in my class. I want 2 different settings. You learn about all the different ethnic groups. I think is important, and then also Black students, so they also find a place where they can imagine a world where there's a place where they belong, or just even kids of color. Like, you know, like a lot of people talk about the Black Atlantic and how that is just like a united place of all of us Black Americans come from to connect in America today, you know, so stuff like that. I think will be like the focus of the teaching or the programs. I'm just like deciding where, you know, because I'm like, it's too small a class and my program is bigger. I can reach out to more. So, but yeah.
So Justice,
I see Dr. Mitchell's influence on you because you can't limit yourself to being a teacher, right? You have to be a transformation agent. So I know she's been influencing you, and I know whatever you do, you will be fabulous. Thank you so much for making time in between class to share your experience with us. And I'd love to read your comic one day if we get the opportunity to share that. So
absolutely
appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So Justice was part of the original group that performed at the MLK. She was also part of the 6 youth we took to Philadelphia and New York City and Washington, D.C. Justice, what was it like to get up there for the first time to tell your story? And what kind of impact did it have on you to be able to continue?
I think it had what you mentioned earlier about you realize there's other people out there that have the same similar story. So you see yourself not being alone. So I thought that was like very useful, which made me like, you know, I know that I think the biggest thing that's hiding from people is being emotional. Like with guys, they can't express themselves, and with women being Black, we have to be strong. So it comes with, I see like there's an intersect of that, of the way that we all connect when it comes to the pain and suffering, being Black for one, and also us being women comes with another barrier of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then in Philadelphia, what was it like to open up in front of 500 people and get that standing ovation? What was that experience like?
I would say it feels like being famous. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's a lot of people, you know. So I think it felt good. One way you can let yourself be out there, but also, yeah, just be out there and connect with people. Like I don't know if you guys don't know what I mean by famous. I don't know. Like a lot of people, you have a lot of audience watching you, and people that care about you want to support you. So that's what it felt like.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you sharing.
Mm-hmm.
We can move to the next slide. We just have a few more. So I just want to make it clear about what is different about what we're doing. Certainly what I explained to you about is the foundation for some of the programming that we're going to be doing at the center that we would really love to do. So we call it the Soul Restoration Center because it started with Bobby Fowler, who's an artist in town, connecting with Daryl Grant, who is at PSU, is a very well-known musician, and coming together to be able to reignite the Albina Arts Center. And so, which gave us the opportunity to be able to take over the lease on that through a grant that we got from Meyer Memorial. And we just poured in to be able to give the community a space that felt very comfortable. It felt like home. It felt like opportunities to gather and imagine. And so we called it, with Daryl's permission, because his project was called the Soul Restoration Project. This is now the Soul Restoration Center, and to be able to reclaim that. And so what you see around the circle is center, because I'm an acronym queen. So I had to just make center, create, to talk about the things that are important to us. We create, we engage, we nurture, we teach, we empower, we remember. And there's the parentheses around the remember, because what we're remembering is our ancestral dreams for us. We're remembering their resilience. We're remembering their joy. And that's a part of our healing process. And bringing in Black elders to be able to connect the youth to the history, we thought was really important. Next slide. And so, this is just an example of how we started in the bottom. It was just like this empty space. And then Daryl Grant came in, Bobby came in, reactivated. And so now these are the pictures of how it looks. We just want to make sure that people feel like this is very culturally appropriate, that there are opportunities, because in our culture, we love to gather and talk, that there are opportunities to do that. Next slide, please. And so the other thing that is different is we really want to focus on entrepreneurship. And we learned this through our internships. One of our, two of our youth that we worked with, who were our facilitators last summer, created a clothing line on their own called Be Proud. And so basically, when I first met one of the youth a couple of years ago, when he was still in high school and we were still at Roosevelt, really, really shy kid, very tall, but he walked around with his hoodie tied up to his chin. He wanted to feel like he was invisible. And so I helped create programming to push him out of his shell a little bit. And he's one of the youth that we took to Philadelphia, and he performed with Justice. And he started recognizing that he was ashamed because of the bullying and he was ashamed of being Black, his culture and all of that. And once he started to really ground himself in his own empowerment, he wanted to teach others how to be proud of themselves. So he named his clothing company Be Proud, and he's selling like hotcakes everywhere he goes. Also opening up an opportunity to have youth experience something that they might not even know that they are interested in, but to expose them to different opportunities, different organizations, different potential jobs, and figure out what is sparking within them to be able to pursue a particular path in life. Next slide, please. I'm not sure whether we can show this. Yeah. You see their website on my computer. I can show you the video, but it's not going to work on this one, but you'll have access to it. Next slide. Oh, it's happening, but I don't hear any sound. Kristen, can you make sound? Okay. It's only a minute long. But Kristen, can you move ahead?
Sorry, the clerk is controlling it.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So what we call the Vibe-In Collective is really our intention to understand that we're not in this work alone. We love what we do, but this is a real intention to engage other organizations. For example, I am more connected, one of our youth poets, to the Metropolitan Youth Symphony. They're going to give a big concert at the Schnitzer, but by taking two youth and putting them together, there is an event this weekend where we're going to have youth come and talk about the gun violence. We're knowing that there are folks out there who are trying to do similar work of empowerment, of really trying to help youth develop, and we want to be able to leverage what we can contribute with what they can contribute. So we're not just in silos trying to do this work. We're actually trying to combine our efforts and our intentions about giving youth the best access to their potential. And how do we do that? We do that in community. And so we call it the Vibe-In Collective, and that's an acronym, but I'm not going to go there. And then we, through this grant that we got from Myra Memorial, we were able to, hire staff to start the foundation of pulling together the center of thinking about how do we do programming and how do we start to reach out to other organizations. And also, we're very interested in being able to publish the voices and the poetry and the graphic novels, and we have so many talents out there, but there's not often a place where they get to showcase all of their various talents. So we want to make sure that we are paying attention to how do we nurture those kinds of opportunities. Next slide, please. So these are some of the folks that have come onto the team. Morrison Joy has a history of peer advocacy around mental health. We want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. So she is on staff. She also does our social media. We're also kind of collaborating with Black mental health therapists to be able to get youth access to the help they need. Linda Mitchell Duncan is responsible for our office, trying to make sure we're all doing the right thing, trying to make sure that everyone's paid when they need to be paid, trying to make sure that we're checking in on all of our to-do things. And as you can see in the first picture, we've been bringing, we've just been having community come in unexpectedly and just hanging out in our space and wanting to do so many different things there. Like we're going to start teaching young people as well as young mothers how to breastfeed, how to wrap your hair. Dickie the Brown Clown is going to work with our younger kids to be able to empower them as well. So we're just open to young, organizations being able to come in and do their work. Sunshine Dixon is helping us. I know a lot of you may know Sunshine already. Very, very strong reputation of being able to be such a great community connector. She has been very involved in the MLK annual tribute. She brings lots of skills and just positive energy. Elias Moreno-Lothe, we brought him in because he has an experience as an educator. He's been in this work for 20 years or more. And because he is also committed to his own healing process. And he is very, very committed to culturally affirming youth advocacy. He's done the work even before he got associated with I Am More. And so he's a great member of the team. Trust him completely. Cole Reed is not actually a paid member of the team, but she's helping us be able to develop the center. This is her skill. And this is what we think is so important. The people who are coming to this effort, we're trying to leverage what they're bringing to the table and what others are bringing to the table to make it even greater. So this is part of our team, and I don't know how much time that we have, but they're there. Can say a few words if we have time, but I want to go to the next one to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh. Okay, so I want to give you the bigger context. We are not just trying to do this thing, right? We are one of only 2 in the country that got a grant to do this opportunity to develop culturally focused social emotional learning. That tends to be a buzzword in education, but we are trying to make sure that our approach is very research-based, again, evidence-based, theory-based. And so we are partnering with Portland Public Schools to be able to do this pilot project. And that's what we want to make as part of of what we're here today to discuss. We will have the country's basically first culturally focused SEL curriculum, then we're going to create that within this project. We also want to document and share the inside out path that we talked about as the best way forward for Black children. We know that their heart is more important over their head in inspiring achievement. We also want to make sure that you know about our intergenerational project called Spreading the Black Joy Virus Project. We started this when the pandemic started because, again, I was really, really depressed. I got hit by a car again, and I really needed joy. And I felt like if I needed joy, other people needed joy. And so we started, working with the youth, working with our elders. And if you're ever driving by MLK in Alberta, where the open house co-working space is that Cole Reed owns, there are photo montages where the community contributed hundreds of photos of themselves with the person that they're honoring, and we made it into a montage and presented it. And so those pictures are there. We want to continue to do things like that. We created a film because we're, again, pulling in the talents from the community. We worked with Elijah Hassan, who is a nationally awarded filmmaker. He did a Black Nod project. We interviewed, must have been 100 or more, including Commissioner Hardesty, of Black people just giving us this way that we greet each other. And even though I was the executive producer, when I watch that over and over, I always get emotional about it because it's our way of identifying, noticing our dignity, of being able to just acknowledge each other. And in communities where there is a limited number of Black folks, it's important that we see each other. And so this is the kind of thing that we're doing. You could find more about it on the Spreading Black Joy website, but we're very, very excited about using different ways to funnel healing toward our community, and particularly with our Black youth who are our future community. If we don't do something differently, how can we expect to really have a strong and vibrant Black community when we are dealing with trauma that is unhealed and is passed down? We want to be able to look forward to what's possible in our community. So Spreading the Black Joy Virus is part of it. We chose virus intentionally because it's person to person. And we have T-shirts, and so that's I think that's the end of our presentation. I don't know what time we have, whether we have time for some of the staff members to say something. That's Commissioner Hardesty, please guide us.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're down to like 25 minutes left. Okay. So we need to hear from Oregon Community Foundation. And then want to make sure that my colleagues don't have any additional questions. And hopefully we'll have time to at least introduce the folks that are working with you, Dr. Mitchell.
Well, thank you for giving me the space to really kind of help folks understand why this work is important to us and why we're doing the work the way we're doing it. Thank you for your time.
I really appreciate I appreciate your vulnerability, Dr. Mitchell, because it's rare for someone to come and testify at City Council and tell such personal stories about who they are, right? Mm-hmm. So I just want to admire that. I've known you forever, and I learned new things about you today as well. She should have a hug. I agree. I see all the other people hugging her. That's good. So I just wanted to take a moment to really appreciate that. This is something that's new. It's different. It's innovative. And I couldn't imagine better hands for this program to be in. So I am very grateful that you said yes. And let's get Niete in and then open it up for conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for that incredibly passionate and compelling presentation. It's so wonderful just to hear your story and really just an honor to work with you. So I also have a presentation. Let me see if this works. Are you able to see that? Great. So good afternoon. As Commissioner Hardesty stated in the beginning, my name is Niete Desai. I am the Director of Community Engagement at the Oregon Community Foundation and am honored to be here today to express my support to establish the Black Youth Leadership Program through RISE in partnership with the Black United Fund of Oregon, and specifically the role that Oregon Community Foundation will play in establishing the grant-making function of the program, the Black Youth Leadership Fund at Oregon Community Foundation. So I have a bit more of a classical presentation than Dr. Mitchell. So here we go, and I'll try to be brief so we can get to dialogue and conversation. Just a background on OCF and Oregon Community Foundation, if you are unfamiliar with the foundation. Then I'll discuss the role that Oregon Community Foundation will play in the Black Youth Leadership Development Program. And then after that, I'll talk through the proposed Community Advisory Committee roles and responsibilities, talk about reporting and outcome measures that OCF can provide in support of this program, and then finally share the proposed budget as part of the program as well. So just a quick overview, if you're not familiar with the Oregon Community Foundation, we are the state's only community foundation, and it is unique in what we do. And so we are here, our mission is to improve the lives for all Oregonians through the power of philanthropy. Our vision is really a healthy, thriving, sustainable Oregon, and our values include collaborative action, wise stewardship, equity, diversity, inclusion, and the spirit of community, all of which this program represents. So as a community foundation, OCF has a lot of different functions. We pool and grow resources, philanthropic resources, in order to really invest and create vital communities in Oregon. And at OCF, it could be individuals, families, businesses, nonprofits, and government entities, and they can set up charitable funds within OCF's endowment, which are then managed by OCF, which is what we're proposing today for the grant-making portion of this program. So we have around 3,000 funds, if not more, every day. It increases with the generosity of people's as they're making decisions about their funding. And OCF provides direct support to nonprofits and the communities they serve in the forms of grants. And then we also provide funds to individuals in the form of educational scholarships. So these investments OCF makes, we cover a lot of ground, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but is to promote community development, local leadership, strengthening of nonprofits, and ultimately advancing our mission. So again, really aligned with everything Dr. Mitchell shared earlier. Just as background to share the role we play, we're really, as you can see, Dr. Mitchell and the Black United Fund are really here to advance the programmatic aspects of this work. And what we do is we do the grant making piece. And so through all of the funds we just mentioned, we in 2021 had a record-breaking year thanks to the generosity of Oregonians across the state, distributing $334 million in grants and scholarships, supporting over 4,000 organizations. And here's some of the areas of focus that we have. So today's proposal is to support this fund by leveraging Oregon Community Foundation's infrastructure and philanthropic capacity to support youth-led grant-making portion of the RISE program. So OCF role will be specifically to set up a fund, process additional gifts, vet and distribute grant applications, and provide additional staffing support through a relationship manager. So I'll go into these briefly now. So one of the roles OCF can play that we do all day long, every day, is setting up funds. And so we will, if awarded, this fund will move into a Black Youth Leadership Fund. One of the beauties of OCF is that the funds can be used to, the fund is open to additional contributions from individuals, other foundations, partners, and other governmental agencies. The purpose of the funds will be to support youth-developed grant recommendations based on a request for proposal and application process. So again, providing the youth the leadership opportunity to design an RFP, develop what the priorities are, open an application, and make grants on behalf of their own stated priorities. This will be a wholly expendable community advised fund, which means it will be spent down year to year and will be advised by a community advisory committee, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. And on behalf of OCF, anyone that contributes to this fund will receive a letter of acknowledgement and will provide annual reporting about the details of these contributions. So another thing we do is we manage many grant programs. And so in support of this program, we will provide due diligence to the grant applications, the award recommendations. We'll make sure that grantees meet legal definitions for eligibility to receive an award. They're in alignment with the mission of the program, and we can confirm their active status with the Oregon Department of Justice. We'll distribute the award letters as well as the grant funds themselves to the recipients. And then finally, OCF will designate a relationship manager. At this moment, it is me, to serve as the primary point of contact for this fund, as well as the appointed chair, be a primary contact for the chair of the Community Advisory Committee. So my role is really essentially to participate in these scheduled committee meetings, support agenda and facilitation, receive the recommendations from the youth and the committee, and move those forward to the OCF Board of Directors for approval and then upon payment. So as we mentioned, as a community advised fund, we do think it's important to have the community involved in supporting the work as we move forward. So this fund is really here to support both accountability as well as oversight. So the proposed scope will be to guide the work of the Black United Fund and RISE program under Dr. Mitchell's leadership. They'll review and ultimately approve the grant recommendations put forward by the youth. And then those recommendations would be presented to OCF Board of Directors for approval and payment. We're proposing the committee is made up of one appointed city staff who represents the office overseeing these funds, 3 to 5 community members who can speak to and represent the Black youth community and lived experience. And then myself as an OCF relationship manager, I'll participate, but I would not be a voting member on grant recommendations. We'll have an appointed chair who will be really a liaison between Black United Fund, Dr. Mitchell, the City of Portland, and my Oregon Community Foundation. And that chair would have access to the OCF fund account so they can see at any moment how many donations are coming in, what's the ongoing balance, how are funds being spent. So per our typical fund reporting process, we'll provide an end of the year grant making report, annual fund balance statement, and of course, if there's any additional reports that are needed, they could be requested at any time. Those reports will include data on number of grants made, recipients, total funds distributed, total amount of additional funding secured above the City of Portland investment. And really the goal here is to leverage the City of Portland's investment to inspire additional giving towards this cause. So the proposal that we have in front of you is around $196,750,000. That includes a 3% fee for OCF to support the relationship management, the administration of the program on our end, and the remaining 97% of the funds allocated to OCF would be used specifically, go back out into community in the form of grants. And that's it. Thank you.
If I may, Madam President, I just wanted to say, Nancy, you were absolutely wonderful. When I approached Oregon Community Foundation, at that time, Max Williams was president of the foundation, and he and I have a 30-some-odd year relationship. He was really, really excited by this program. But in all honesty, it was Nancy that actually helped us really think through the early stages when we were getting a lot of unsolicited advice about how we should build the program. You really helped us really think, you helped me think through it and my team. And I'm so grateful for Oregon Community Foundation's immediately saying, yes, 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 how can we help? And you've been absolutely wonderful. So I just want to thank you publicly and send my love to Max Williams, who didn't hesitate to say, yes, how do we partner? How do we help? So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Keelan, is there any testimony on this item?
I see Commissioner Ryan's hand is up.
Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Madam President Rubio. I just wanted to ask Nancy a real quick question. I see that you mentioned that the city's investments has leveraged others to give, and I heard Meyer Memorial, I think, came out of the good doctor's mouth. So how much have we leveraged? It's always exciting to hear about that.
We haven't leveraged yet. So if this was to be approved, it would be invested in this fund and then open to additional funding and contributions to grow the program.
Okay, so this is the seed. This is the seed money to do the leverage.
And the Meyer funding went directly to, and Dr. Mitchell can speak to that.
Okay, got it. In my former life, this is really all I did. So of course I want to geek out on these questions. Thanks so much. It's exciting.
Great. Are there any more questions from my colleagues? Mayor Wheeler.
It's kind of fun trying to figure this out from the other side. And thank you, Commissioner Rubio, for presiding this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I have nothing but praise for this. And Dr. Mitchell, I have long admired you. And as the years tick by, I admire you more. And I'm really appreciative of what you're doing here. And I'm appreciative of the approach you use. The schematic you used, I think, explained a lifetime of experience in one PowerPoint slide. That's probably some kind of a record. Hearing Justice talk about the next generation's energy and passion and commitment to addressing these issues in a really important and I think creative way, and hearing her admiration for you and your lived experience and your life work, that really touched something important with me. Niate, as you know, I'm a financial nerd. I confessed earlier this morning on a different issue that one of my favorite words in the English language is, colleagues?
Leverage.
Leverage, exactly. And so you led with that, you raised it a second time and you finished with it. And so that's near and dear to my heart. And I agree with you. I think that on issues such as this, it's really an area where government's participation can be helpful. And we can help bring attention to this, and we can help support your efforts at the Oregon Community Foundation. And I want to share my colleague, Commissioner Hardesty's gratitude towards the Oregon Community Foundation for taking on this, frankly, huge responsibility with the donor advised fund on behalf of this effort in the community. I think this is great. I apologize. I'm going to have to leave this call because I'm convening a group of mayors at 4:30 and I need to prepare for that. I realize we're not taking a vote on this today. Is that correct? This is a non-emergency ordinance?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm not missing the action, but I will probably miss a few more comments and maybe even a few more people speaking, and I apologize for that. But I just want to say how grateful I am for this presentation. Commissioner Hardesty, is always how much I'm grateful for this partnership, and to my colleagues who I know who will enthusiastically embrace this. I hope I'm not spoiling the surprise for next week, but this is just really well thought out, and it strikes a number of the core commitments that this council has agreed to. So it's very, very well done, and I appreciate it.
Mayor, before you leave, I just want to say, Mayor, that you and I were here when we were trying to figure out how do we be responsible responders to what we heard over 100+ days of protest. Mm-hmm. And I just want to publicly thank you for not wavering in your support for this program. It took us a minute to get it together because we did want to do it radically differently, and we wanted to be very intentional. But I just want to thank you for standing with me back in 2020 and again here in 2022. Thank you.
Back at you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you later.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments from my colleagues? Well,
that's all I see. If I may, I just want to one more time. I want to say something because Dr. Mitchell mentioned being the only Black woman in spaces and what that feels like sometimes. And it really doesn't matter what your background is, what your educational attainment is. I can tell you from the seat that I sit in today, I have the exact same experiences. So I can tell you that titles, education, position does not remove the racism that is experienced on a daily basis, right? So you were brave enough to put that out in public. So I wanted to be right back at you, my sister, and say, trust me, you are not the only one that's had that lived experience. But we get up every day and keep doing it anyway. So thank you.
And I just want to also echo those comments. Commissioner Hardesty, thank you for moving these investments forward and for your vision to doing that. It matters so much that you're here on this council and we're seeing the impact of how it makes a difference in people's lives today. This is a perfect example. And Dr. Mitchell, I could listen to you all day. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for your leadership. I've been reading you and watching you and engaging with you since I was a very young in my career, and I've just been drawn to you because of your story. And you were in those white spaces. You were the first, so I saw even myself in you. In those along that your career, your trajectory, and we're all proud of everything you've accomplished on behalf of all of us. We all see ourselves in your success and your accomplishments. So I just want you to know how important you've been in my life too, even though, from afar. And so I want to learn from you in this program. I want to learn how I could be helpful from my office to take a more active role in supporting this really critical work. It goes right to the heart of healing and joy, as you mentioned. And it's such a different way, such an asset-based way and healing, nurturing way of working with youth that we have to change the paradigm about how we work with youth in this community. And someone once told me that the most radical act of social justice as a Black, Indigenous, or person of color is to practice self-care. And that's exactly what you're doing through this. Healing through love is self-care, is self-love. And it's what Black children need every single day. So anyway, hats off to you. Thank you for everything you're doing in the community. We support you because you see all of us. So I just want to say that as a personal thing. I look forward to seeing more of this work and the great work that comes from it and this project. It's such a bright spot in a very hard week. So thank you for that. So with that, I don't know what happens next.
Actually, Commissioner Rubio, or
Yes.
Madam President, because we have our distinguished guest here, I just want to say a couple things. And that is, thank you for just showing up, Dr. Renee Mitchell, as your total, vulnerable, open, real self. Like Commissioner Rubio, I lost track of time. And that doesn't always happen at city council meetings. And it was, anyway, you connected to I think everyone's heart because you shared yours. And you can just feel the healing that's going on. And we always people talk a lot about restorative justice. Thanks for demonstrating it. Thanks for demonstrating it as your whole self. And then you could experience it when the amazing student down at U of O, go Ducks, was on the video, and you could feel her vulnerability come out. And so you're passing it on. And then when you see that you're including Black elder mentorship and entrepreneurship and service learning, it's just, this is restorative justice. Thanks for having the courage to go for it. And thank you, OCF, for being our partner. And thank you, Commissioner Hardesty and Mayor Wheeler, for taking a pause and getting it right and not having a quick reactionary retaliation type whatever, but really taking a breath and being in the restorative place that we need to be in as we heal and move forward as a society, a multicultural society. Anyway, I'm so appreciative. I look forward to voting yes next week. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. This is such a special presentation. I just want to say thank you again. And Dr. Mitchell, I hope you come back soon.
We're gonna have to invite her back now.
Yes.
Right, yes.
Absolutely.
The best care for after lunch meetings, right?
Yes, yes. So with that
Dr. Mitchell, if we could get your PowerPoint, I'm going to put that chart right on the wall behind me so that I can refer to it regularly. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. So with that, Keelan, this is the first reading, so this item will be moved to second reading. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I think that concludes the business of the city for today. So I just want to thank everyone for your patience with me at my first time presiding over council, and we are adjourned.
You were fabulous. You were absolutely fabulous. And you know, today was a day of healing. We started the morning crying and we're ending the day crying. Yes. It's a good day. It's a good day when we get to start the healing process. Thank you all so much.
Yes. Let's bottle it up. All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.